Well, I wasn't going to talk about myself too much, but since Deborah gave me that introduction, maybe it is relevant to just say very quickly that the fact that I am kind of a jack of all trades, that it took me a very long time to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And I didn't do my PhD until 1997 after having many of those other careers that Deb described. And I think the relevance of that to what we're going to do today is that by the time I became a professor, by the time I became a sociologist, I had lots of different lives in different facets of education. And that being a professor in an academic institution brought together for me a number of different interests I had in different ways that I had been an educator before. And so even though I am in a sociology department, I had worked in education in different kinds of levels from preschool to college over the years. And when I got into academia and realized that the part that I loved, the teaching, had to be melded with this other thing called research, which I wasn't quite so excited about, I accidentally really discovered the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, which was a fascinating way for me personally to pull these two things together. So as I talk today, I hope you'll discover too that this can be one way to sort of, for those of you who might be in my camp, of liking what you do in the classroom a little bit more than some of what you do in the lab and in your writing and publishing, that this might be a way to combine those things. Okay, so what I plan for the next hour and a half roughly is that I want to spend maybe 15 to 20 minutes talking first of all about what is the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning and what is a course portfolio and how does a course portfolio fit into that model. Deborah's told me a little bit about your situation here in terms of how you count your faculty work and go up for promotion and tenure. So I have a rough sketch, and being part of the SUNY system, we're probably not that far off in how we do that, but feel free to come into my discussion at any point. I want this to be reasonably informal. So although I will try to present a lot of information, I'm open to always tailoring it for your situation if you can help me know what that is. So I'll talk for 15-20 minutes about what is Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, what are course portfolios and how do they fit into that model, and how do they fit into what we call faculty work and the promotion and tenure we're all interested in as part of that work. Then I want to take 15 or 20 minutes to talk about a portfolio that I did for a particular course in my department in sociology that was called Aging in an Urban Society, or Sociology of Aging. We went through a course retitling somewhere along that line. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how I fumbled my way through making my own portfolio and learned a lot along the way. So I will try to convey to you a lot of what I did and what I wish I had done differently. And then I'd like to take the last part of it, maybe the last 45 minutes or 50 minutes, to involve you in a more active participatory way in sort of thinking about what we've discussed in the first 40 minutes and how it might be relevant to your work and to what you're doing right now and how you might fit that into your framework here at CUNY. So if that's not what you came to hear, now might be the time to spend your time more benefitly elsewhere. Okay, so I have been at Buffalo State for about 12 years. And I don't know how many of you know anything about Buffalo State. We are often confused with the other SUNY center in Buffalo, which is the University at Buffalo. So there are two SUNY centers there, two major SUNY centers. One is the University Center, which is the big research one institution. And SUNY at Buffalo, where I am, is the smaller liberal arts college that used to be the Teachers College and then grew into a more comprehensive master's granting institution. So we live constantly in the shadow of this big brother, big sister, whatever you want to call it, that we are always being compared to, mistaken for. We get faculty who apply to us who think they're applying there. It's very confusing because we go by the same name. We're SUNY at Buffalo. But SUNY that I teach in Buffalo State is very different from the Research One University. Our students, I believe, and I have taught at the other institution too, so I do have some validity for my comparison. Our students are much more diverse, for one thing, diverse in all kinds of aspects. They are racially diverse, they are age-wise diverse, they are readiness diverse in the extreme. I have had students in my classes that far exceed the work of some master's students I've taught, and I have some that far underneath many of the high school students that I've taught. So we have an incredible range of diversity, of ability, of backgrounds. But what I think ties many of our students together in our context is that they are the majority of them are first-generation college students. They come from working class backgrounds. They come from families where education is seen as a ticket to a better life. And we all know that that's not the way it works anymore, but they and their families are still pinning their hopes on this. I say that because these students are coming to us with other agendas, and you may recognize these students who are working full-time as well as going to school full-time, many of whom are also single parents, and they are juggling 15 balls in the air at the same time. We meet about somewhere around 12,000 of those students on our campus every day. Many of them are part-time students, but the majority are full-time students. To cater to that diverse population, we have about 500 full-time faculty and a complement of about 300 part-timers who come in and out in terms of contracts, etc. So that's just to give you a little diversity. We're an inner-city campus. We are, Buffalo doesn't have much of an inner city anymore. It's kind of decayed and crumbled, and along with the other Rust Belt cities. But we are in a section of the city that's surrounded by museums, by inner city, by a lot of poverty, a lot of issues that our students are dealing with. So that's just to give you a little context of who we are, where we are, and what we're doing. Into that, about 10 or 12 years ago, Buffalo State as a faculty decided that we wanted to become attached to the Carnegie Foundation of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, which at that time was responding to Ernest Boyer's Scholarship Reconsidered, which is now some 20 years old. In that monograph, Ernest Boyer tried to shake up the academy by saying, you folks are defining scholarship and research far too narrowly. You define scholarship for people who work in higher education across the board, from two-year colleges to Research One, as doing what he called discipline-based research, the thing that you're all familiar with from your disciplines. And he tried to encourage the academy to think more broadly about scholarship and said, he proposed 3 additional kinds of scholarship in addition to that scholarship of within your discipline, discipline-based scholarship. Those were looking at a possibility of applied scholarship, which would be the notion that you would take the work of some other theorist, some other person who has already developed it, and put it into a new setting and study what happened in a different context. So he said that that kind of applied work should be given credence and credibility in the academy. He also said that doing what you might think of as meta-analysis, looking at all of the research that's been done on the topic and pulling that together, is a very rigorous kind of scholarship in his mind, and that we don't do enough of. We do our little bits and pieces of scholarship, but he said it's really important that some of us step back from that and do a real solid analysis of all we know about a particular topic. And the 4th kind of scholarship he called the scholarship of teaching and learning. And that he advocated that all academics who are in the classroom, regardless of their discipline, should be encouraged to treat the work that they do in the classroom in a scholarly way. And by that he meant that not everyone has to do research on their classroom, but that they should be using the research that already exists about what we know about human learning as they work in the classroom. And that some small proportion of us would choose to add to our research agendas this notion of scholarship of teaching and learning, which means that we would treat this more seriously. We would be the ones who would do more rigorous classroom-based research about how students learn within our discipline. So I, as a sociologist, might be intrigued by what are some of the major stumbling blocks, core concepts that seem to make students not get sociology. And I might try to pursue what are those core ideas and how can we best communicate them to students, and what happens to block their learning if they don't get it. That's just an example within my discipline. Another thing that happened in a biology department that I'm aware of, the faculty in that department said, we're getting in these students and they're so, again, the preparation is all over the map. They're coming into an introduction to biology class and they're failing out like crazy, and we need to figure out why. They started doing some investigation and they discovered that students had forgotten how to use microscopes. And the professors were assuming that they'd done all this in high school and treating it as a very trivial, obvious thing that they needed to know how to do. Therefore, they were failing most of their lab work because they had forgotten the basic skills of using microscopes. So that bit of research helped them backtrack and give students what they needed to succeed in that discipline. So what we mean is taking a particular problem in the teaching and learning context and doing some systematic investigation of it to see how we can better encourage student learning. That's the most simple way to define scholarship of teaching and learning. So Buffalo State was interested in figuring out how could we promote people in our campus to do that. And we decided to have an advisory committee of many different folks from different disciplines and different seniority levels come together and figure out how we could do this. And we started out with a shotgun approach, doing workshops and seminars like I'm doing today. And after a couple of years of that, we had a little powwow and we stepped back and we said, you know, this isn't working, because no matter how interested folks are, if this doesn't count for promotion and tenure, why would they do it? You know, they really need to be putting their effort in things that are going to get them promoted. So step back, we looked at our promotion and tenure guidelines, we worked on our campus, we have faculty governance. We worked with faculty governance to draft a new policy that would put scholarship of teaching and learning in the category of scholarship provided it met certain criteria. And we got that through our faculty senate. We got it through the president, who signed it into law about 6 or 7 years ago now. So we now have in place a policy at Buffalo State that for our faculty who choose to do the scholarship of teaching and learning that meets certain criteria, standards for scholarship, they can count that in their scholarly work. Now that's not true on every campus, but we decided we needed to do that. The second thing we did was have some grants, which I understand you have faculty grants here too to promote individuals to do research in this area. And that's been very helpful to us in getting people interested in doing particular kinds of projects. We did it a little differently on our campus in that in order to get the administrators to pony up this amount of money, because it was coming out of the provost's office, we said, you tell us what you need people to do research on. Instead of them just being interested, what do you need? And they said things like, well, you know, we'd really like to try first-year learning communities, but we don't have a clue what that's going to mean for students. We read some stuff about, you know, it helps student retention, but does it help student learning? We'd really like to know that. Okay, faculty applies for a fellowship. They're going to study the impact of a demonstration group of first-year learning communities and see with a control group what's the difference in learning outcomes for those students. We've got all this service learning going on in our community. Some people say it's good for students. The literature says there's something going on there, but it's not very articulate about exactly what is it going on for. One of the things we're trying to do is encourage a lot of diversity education on our campus. Let's see if we can use service learning to encourage development of student understanding of diversity. Okay, good faculty project. Someone's going to take that on, they're going to do the research, it feeds back to the campus community, they get a couple publications or presentations out of it as well. So that's how we do fellowships on our campus. Okay, that's setting the context of Buffalo State and how we do scholarship of teaching and learning. Set in the midst of all that was myself as director of the Carnegie Foundation on our campus, helping with the fellows and helping with the advisory committee. And in the midst of that, I became interested in my own work, because I was an untenured faculty member at the time, and how I could use some of this scholarship of teaching and learning stuff to help get myself tenure. And at one of the international meetings that I was at, I heard people talking about course portfolios. And I decided that this sounded like an interesting idea. So what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit today is what are course portfolios and how do they fit into this scholarship of teaching and learning idea. But I think before I jump straight into that, I want to ask you a question related to the little introduction I just gave. Because someone said clearly here that on our campus, our faculty work is counted as scholarship, teaching, service. Those are the three main categories we work with. think about for a moment, in your department and in this institution, what are some of the characteristics that put faculty work in the category of scholarship rather than the category of service or teaching? What are characteristics of faculty work that put it in the category of scholarship rather than teaching or service? Think about that for a minute. Maybe you want to chat to somebody you're sitting close to who might be from another department. Let's see if we can come up with some characteristics of what makes something scholarship. Okay, what did you come up with? What are some of the things that help you decide that something counts as scholarship? Peer review. All right, so it has to be subjected to peer review. And let's extrapolate a little bit from that. In order to be subjected to peer review, we have to create a product, right? So there has to be some kind of documentation of that scholarship in a form that goes for peer review. Now, for most of us, we are very, very painfully aware of what that form is, right? It looks like a peer-reviewed journal does. And there's a formula for how we do that for most of us. A few of you who do you have some arts and humanities people here? Because your formula is a little different from the natural and social sciences, but the natural and social sciences formula is very predictable. How do we report scholarship? What's the shorthand way that we report our scholarship? Just the outline of what it looks like. Some kind of an introduction, followed by some kind of a research design is embedded in there somewhere. A literature review is embedded in there somewhere. Findings, analysis, discussion, conclude. We have those headings. We know what they mean. We understand that. All right, that peer review process is about taking that little shorthand summary of our work that follows that formula and handing it to others who are knowledgeable enough to make a decision from that shorthand. We don't put in every data file. We don't put in every word of every transcript that we've transcribed. We do the shorthand and we communicate it to others, and they look at our shorthand and make a decision about whether this is original research. That's another characteristic that most places counts, that you're contributing something to the knowledge base. Sometimes we do replicatory things, but for the most time it's original. So we're looking for those kinds of things. Now, in scholarship of teaching and learning, we are trying to find a convenient kind of way of packaging what we do in the classroom in a way that can communicate the work of preparing and teaching classes to other people. And we don't have that wonderful formula that we've developed over the years for our disciplinary research. But we still want to get it peer reviewed because that's a key part of what makes something scholarship. So the scholarship of teaching and learning, in order to be peer reviewed, we have to document it in some way, and we have to put our shorthand in a way that communicates to other people all the work that we did, without giving them every piece of every bit of work that's happened. So we're doing a similar kind of thing. So every time that you prepare a course in teaching, and this is where scholarship of teaching and learning is coming from, if we're thinking of it as a scholarly endeavor, and let's all be honest, you can teach and have it not be a scholarly endeavor. You know, there are lots of convenient little formulaic things out there, and the publishers are doing their best to give us all the little shorthand things we need so that we can pick up a textbook and we can pick up the attachment materials. And there's not much scholarly involved in that, quite frankly. But you can make teaching a scholarly activity. To do that, there are three elements of teaching course that come into the design of a course portfolio. You have to think about what you're going to teach. And when I use the word design, I mean more than pick up a textbook and look at the table of contents and follow it through. Now, looking at materials is an important part of designing a course, but designing really steps back and starts with, what do I want my students to do at the end of this course? Even though there might be a course outline that went through all the channels and is approved and has these objectives, in my classroom, when they enter my room, what do I want students to do when they come out the other end? That's the very beginning of designing. That's your overall goal. which you then sort of filter into objectives, and then you need to find those teaching materials, like textbooks, and decide how you're going to deliver the material in the classroom, beyond just lecture. Some way of getting students to really understand and grapple with, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. So design is all of that. The implementation, actually putting it into process, is the tricky part, because we've all had good intentions, and then you get in the classroom and they all fall away. And sometimes the implementation is sort of out of our control to a certain extent. I mean, sometimes you get a group of students that just, what you wanted to do is not going to work. And some of that's back to like the level of preparation of students. There's lots of factors that can contribute to the implementation. You get a classroom that's a disastrous, I don't know about here, but at Buffalo, we are so short of classrooms. And I can plan the most wonderful activity with all kinds of small group work, and I end up in a room like this. You know, how can I make 100 students get into small groups when they're all in fixed chairs and there's nowhere for them to move? So sometimes the room we get assigned to can dictate or undo a lot of what we'd hoped to do. Always we are faced with outcomes. How do we assess what happened in our classroom? And this is a little bit of a tricky part in scholarship of teaching and learning, is that some people don't like it when I say this, but sometimes the outcomes aren't attributable to us. Sometimes students learn in spite of us. Hopefully, often they learn because of us, but sometimes I think they learn regardless of what we're doing. But for the most part, we're going to assume that every well-designed course that is exhibiting scholarship involves design, implementation, and looking at outcomes. In a course portfolio, we are assuming that we are going to document these pieces of what we do in scholarly work in a way that communicates that it really is a scholarly investigation. We start out with a goal. This is what I want my students to do. And we try to figure out how to make that happen. Then we implement it, and then we assess it. It's focused very much on the course as the unit of analysis. Even though you bring in the work of individual students, your unit of analysis in a court portfolio is a particular course. Sometimes it's one course over time, but it's a course that you're looking at. And the focus is on the student learning. We talk about our own pedagogy, we talk about the design of the course, but ultimately the purpose is to present some evidence of student learning that documents your reflections on the impact of that course. And we'll talk about how to do that in a little bit. Pat Hutchings has a textbook that is called Course Portfolio, and this is on the reference list that I'll give you at the end of today, so you'll have all the references for this. And she talks about 3 different kinds of course portfolios. And all of these are interesting and slightly different ways of thinking about how you might use a course as a unit of analysis. She calls the first one course anatomy, which is just a cross-sectional examination of a single course to see how the pieces fit together. It's a very humiliating experience to sit down and look at the tests and the assignments you give and realize that they're really only tangentially created to the goals you have for your students. And I've had this happen to me. You know, I have a big class and I resort to bubble sheets and I do multiple choice, and then I get to the end and I think, you know, that isn't what I wanted to test students on. I really wanted to get at something more. So how all the pieces fit together, how does the design, the implementation, the assessment all come together is part of the course anatomy. And this is what Bernstein, I know some of you are more familiar with Bernstein's book of Making Teaching and Learning Visible. He refers to this as a benchmark portfolio. You can look at a course history, which is a single course that you've altered over time. So some people whose portfolios I show you on the internet today have taken a course that was really not working well for them. And they've looked at what are they doing in that course when they start tweaking it, and then they've followed changes and student outcomes over time to see what is making a difference in terms of student learning. So you can document what I believe you call in this campus course development, which you put, I think, in your service category, where you're really taking a course and revising it and changing it and trying to figure out what is the impact of this. And you could use a course portfolio for doing that. Course ecology, I don't really like that category, but that's her term, is really how does a course fit into the broader curriculum within your department. You may have a course that your department, either through departmental assessment or through an accreditation process, is questioning putting resources into this particular course anymore. How does it fit? What are students getting out of it? How does it build into what we're trying to do with students? And maybe a faculty member wants to take that course and really try to figure out either how it could be altered to make it more coherent with the package and what you're trying to do in your department, or maybe it does need to be gotten rid of if it really is not effective. And you might find that out through this kind of course ecology. A course investigation is a much more systematic, much more rigorous thing where you have a hypothesis that you want to test. What would happen if we did X, Y, Z in the classroom? And so you instigate a very specific change in what's happening in the classroom, and you follow systematically what's happening with students. Obviously, to do that kind of an investigation, you need some kind of a comparison group, and this gets a little tricky, and the ethics of it and the IRB stuff can get a little messy. But you need to figure out an ethical way to have a comparable group that you can study if you're going to try a hypothesis testing. Although I've had some teachers do amazingly clever things with this. I had a chemistry teacher once who was interested in revising the lab work in an introductory course to make it much more concrete and practical for students rather than just the beakers in the lab sort of thing. And she didn't have 2 sections of the course, so she had to figure out a way to try some of these labs and figure out what the implications were in an ethical way with one group of students. I think she came up with a really clever idea. She divided the class in 2, and for her first, whatever the first lab was on pH testing, let's say, half of the class did the traditional in the lab with the beakers and the pH papers and the whatever, and the other lab had a service learning project where they went out to a community garden and did pH soil testing on the soil there for the community. And then, with whatever the next topic was, she switched the groups. So ultimately, half of the labs were practical and half of the lab, but she had a comparison for the concept to see whether the students got the concept better when they had more practical orientation. So that's just to say it can be done if you need to do that kind of investigation. Okay, some of the benefits of doing course portfolios for departments and individuals. It creates a public means, it creates that product we were talking about before. I think that a lot of people try to capture teaching and learning in a teaching portfolio. And a teaching portfolio, in my experience, is often a wheelbarrow full of everything you've ever done, just in case whoever's looking at it is looking for that particular piece of paper. And it doesn't fit together well because it's this collection of some exams you've written and some courses and some student work, and it's just like, how do I make this all fit together? It just doesn't hang together well. Where a course portfolio is all about how does it hang together. And interestingly, when Pat Hutchings was writing this book, she and Lee Shulman made a statement that I wish every administrator would read. And they were countering the way that we assess teaching right now through pure observation, through someone coming in and watching you teach. And they were saying, yeah, who can't do that? I mean, you're a pretty pathetic person if you can't put on a good show for 45 minutes. Most people can pull that off. But look at someone's course in depth. Now that's hard to pull off and fool somebody about it. So Shulman and Hutchings were saying, if you really want to get a snapshot of someone's teaching, don't walk into their room for 40 minutes. Have a look at how they design an entire course, with including examples of students' work, and you'll get a much more accurate picture of whether or not they're treating their teaching in a scholarly way. Also, of course, two other important things here. We need a product in order for it to be peer evaluated, and part of, if we're going to call this scholarship, we need other people's feedback. And secondly, if we are going to build a knowledge base about teaching in higher ed, just like we build a knowledge base within our disciplines, we have to start sharing stuff with each other. We can't build a knowledge base if we continue to just do this stuff, put it in the promotion portfolio and let it collect dust. Somehow it has to get out there through presentations, through publications, through workshops, even if it's just through your department. Secondly, faculty learn by reflecting on student learning. It's really easy to say, oh my God, was this a disaster? This is one of the worst times through. I just don't know what happened. They really didn't get it. End of story, on to next semester. It takes a lot more work to try to figure out what was going on this semester. Why did that happen? Why did they just not get it still? I just had one of my colleagues come into my office. She's teaching an intro class. All she does all semester is pound what we call the big three to them, the big three theories, looking at symbolic interactionism and functionalist theory and Marxist theory, and sort of as perspectives of the world. And she said, they still don't get it. You know, here it is. We're 3 weeks away from the final. And she was giving them examples, and they still don't get it. You know, those kinds of frustrating, everybody has those frustrations. But why? What is happening here? That's about number 2. And lastly, being attentive to and integrating and repressing the connections, representing the connections between teaching and learning, which then shapes our practice. I pose to you that a lot of learning goes on in situations where not much teaching is happening. So what we're trying to make is the connection between what we think we're doing when we're teaching and what's happening in our students' brains. Now, hopefully a lot of it is due to what we're doing, but some of it, as I said, might be in spite of us. So we have to figure out, how is that connecting? What's going on there? Is the introduction piece that I said I was going to hope by the end of this you get a little bit of a feel for 2 things. What is Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and what is a course portfolio? Yes?
When you say a lot of learning is going on when there's not much teaching, are you talking about when there's not much lecturing? Or are you talking about the stuff that they do that we're not directing them to at all?
I think that for a lot of students, we just begin to get their brains going in a certain direction, and that the penny really drops sometime later when we're not even involved. And so it's something we start the spin-off, but something else happens later on. That's the true learning. That's the really transformative stuff. And making that connection, how do you get that initial spin-off, is what I'm curious about. Anything else that will help you better understand Scholarship of Teaching and Learning? We're going to talk later about what's in a course portfolio, but you just have a picture of what their functions. Okay, let me talk to you for just a few minutes about my course portfolio and what I did. And now we unveil this piece. Let me just first of all give you, sorry, technology is not my forte. Let me talk to you first a little bit about my design of this course called Aging in an Urban Society. And I want to tell you that I have no background in aging. My background is in early childhood, family development, and my department had no one who wanted to teach this course, and it hadn't been taught for years. And we were getting pressure from the psychology department, who had a minor in aging, to teach this course. And I was very new on the faculty. It was one of those situations where I discovered too late that everybody had stepped backwards 3 steps and I was left standing out in the front. I was like, oh great, now I have to figure out how to teach a course on aging. And I'm thinking in my mind, I really understand why students don't take, who wants to take a course about aging, you know? So I didn't have any great ideas for how to do this. It wasn't my area, but I knew I was going to have to do it. And of course, as I said, I was coming up for promotion in tenure, so I thought, well, I'll take this on as an opportunity, since I've got to start from day scratch figuring this out. I'm just going to try to keep track of how I do this. So this was mainly one of those snapshot baseline kind of portfolios. I made a mistake of kind of using language like I was really trying to do the hypothesis testing, which was wrong. I shouldn't have gone there, but I'll talk about that mistake later. So what I did was in the design phase, we have in the sociology, maybe other disciplines have this too, through our professional association, you can get collections of syllabi. So if you have a topic that you're teaching and you never taught it before, you can order this book, and it's pretty reasonable, and it's a whole collection of syllabi. Now you could probably just do that on the internet, just Google a course name and you could get a bunch. So I went through a whole lot of different people's ideas of how they taught aging to just give me some frame of reference for different ways people did it. I looked at all the textbooks that were out there, the kinds I contacted all the agents and said, I'm teaching a new course, what have you got in the area of aging? And of course they all flood you with everything they want you to buy. I went on the internet to see if there were some sort of information sharing sites from other professors who were doing aging classes. And then I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? How do I want to teach it? And I selected a particular way that I thought I wanted to frame this course. And I wasn't terribly creative. I kind of took a framework that other people had done, but I liked that orientation. And then I wrote my syllabus with the course goals and the content and strategies, assessments, etc., trying to fit the assessment in. What I decided in this design phase was I knew a little bit about NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement, and how NSSE was developed on the idea that there are certain characteristics of the learning situation that reflect student engagement with learning. And according to NSSE, this is the key to getting students interested in your classes. If you can get them engaged, they will learn. If you can't get them engaged, it's very hard to get them to learn. So I thought, okay, let me take some of they have 5 or 6 characteristics of student engagement, what it looks like, and are there any of those I could weave into this class in planning? Well, one of them is active and collaborative learning. I thought I could probably do an active and collaborative learning piece. Another one is, interestingly, academic rigor. They say that if students are in a class that they think is too easy, it's just a blow-off class, they don't put any effort into it and they really don't learn much. And if it's way too challenging over their heads in that level, they don't learn a lot either. So you have to get the rigor at the right level. If you know anything about Vygotsky or other learning theorists, you're just kind of pushing them a little bit outside of their comfort zone so that they really do learn something. And I took a number of these characteristics and tried to figure out how I could incorporate them into a class on aging. So I designed a couple of assignments. Like the first one, I had them think about what were some of the issues that elderly people faced if they were trying to age in place in their community. Things like transportation, things like healthcare, things like housing. And they had to take one that they were interested in and do sort of an international paper for assignment 1, no, national paper for assignment 1, on how this need was presently exhibited in the United States and what were some of the programs that were being instituted to help elders deal with this. And I'm trying to show you my students now in the library. Oh, now we have to do the what, F8 and function F. No, we shouldn't have to, because that's right, we did this. It's up there. It's just not here. Okay, this is tricky. Hit the on button. Press it again. We want to do that. We want to take that off. That's what we want to do. All right, let's see. I can't see the bottom of the screen to get to where there we go. There's nothing on my laptop screen. That's why I'm struggling here. There we go. Okay. All right, these are my students, and we started out in the library, learning how to look through databases and do some research in the library, and we had the librarian help us. And so the first assignment was kind of a traditional, sort of ordinary kind of standard assignment. But then for the second assignment, we looked locally in Buffalo. We went out to some senior centers in Buffalo and talked to people who were working in the area of housing and healthcare and all these different things that students were doing. We met with some seniors and did some interviewing of them to try and ask them about what was going on in their situation. And the students then, where's my cursor? Here we go. After they did all this, they presented their work in a paper at our student research conference. So we have an undergraduate learning, you probably have an undergraduate research conference of some sort, or undergraduate research. We have a conference at the end of the year where students just present their work to each other. So that was our provost looking at the students in one iteration of the posters they made. This was another group that did a different topic. And I just wanted you to sort of see how it looked. Sometimes it helps to see that there are real students involved here.
How large is that class?
I'm sorry?
How large is that class?
This class had only 10 students in it. And that was not my choice. I would have liked to have a bigger class. It was too small, but it was not a popular class, as I reassure you. So we had to do the best we could. We didn't have public transportation to get to these places. I just had to work out a time when we could all kind of meet there. We do fortunately have a lot of facilities fairly close to campus, so they're not too far a walk if it's not snowing. That's the big if in Buffalo. So okay, that was how I designed the course. Then I had to implement it. We ran into some problems along the way in implementing. Like my grand plan was, first of all, that students were going to connect with one of the elders in the senior center and do a very personal interview, and we had IRB approval for all of that. There were major problems that I had not considered about young students. Most of these, as you'll see, were women. There were just a couple of males, but even so, young people coming to meet with elders. Some of the elders were sort of threatened by that. Even though it was happening in public spaces, they were not real comfortable with being in a conference or an interview session with young people. That just never entered my mind. I learned a lot from doing this. Like I said, aging isn't my field. So we ran into some complications as I was implementing. I kept a log as things were going right and wrong, just very brief notes. The outcomes, I have to say that I did not do extra assessment of students for this. In other words, when I wrote up my portfolio, I took all of the normal stuff that they gave me for a grade, their papers, their tests, with two exceptions. And that is that I did have a comparison group of a family class that I was teaching, because one of the things I was measuring with a pre-test, post-test was whether their attitudes towards elders and their attitudes towards aging had changed from what they were at the beginning of the class to the end of the class. And I did a comparable group in my family, Sociology of Family class, because I thought it was sort of related but not specifically targeted, just to see if the same thing happened there. So I did that as extra. But otherwise, I did the regular evaluation forms that I always do, the end of course evaluations, the tests. I didn't do any extra assessment for the course portfolio other than what I normally do. But I did use almost everything that I graded students on, plus my own, and keeping the log was the other. I said two things. The comparable group from family and my keeping a log of what was going right and wrong. I don't normally do that when I'm teaching, but I did for this. And then I had to collect the formative and summative data, so the things that were happening along the way. I did sort of a mid-course, which I often do with students. How are things going? What's giving you trouble? What's working well? And I had to sort of do that summative and formative data collected. I did both a holistic analysis looking at the whole package of stuff, and I did a comparison group, and then I did some additional reflection that I probably don't do in every class I teach. And then I tried to make some suggestions out of what I found for what we could do differently in teaching this course in my department. So in a sort of a little synopsis. That's what I was doing with my personal portfolio for this class. In the handout, I've got more details of this. By the way, the portfolio, by the time I had samples of students' work and stuff, the thing that I actually gave in my promotion and tenure review was pretty weighty. But I created an executive summary, which is basically like a paper-length thing of about 10 pages that was at the front. And then you've got another summary in the handout that's even a shorter thing that I've done at presenting conferences. So it's been distilled down at several levels. So what I discovered was, first of all, I was looking at students developing skills, and I don't think a semester was long enough for the kind of skills I was hoping they would develop. And I think I learned that I was overambitious in what I was trying to do with them. I made the mistake of not having a grading rubric on a couple of the assignments, and I think that was not good. So the next time I taught it, I made sure that I had a grading rubric involved. And sometimes faculty involve students in creating grading rubrics. I didn't do that the second time I taught it through, but you could. The structured opportunities for collaboration. In other words, one of the things I wanted them to do in active and collaborative learning was to do several of them were doing a topic, and they were supposed to come up with some recommendations for needs in Buffalo from several of them having looked at transportation. And I didn't give them enough time in class to work collaboratively on that. And for our students, if it happens outside of class, trying to get them together with work schedules and everything, it's just really hard. So I guess the next time, if I'm going to really think about collaboration, I'm going to have to give up some class time. And this one was the one about, I started on trying to get this interview thing all set up weeks before the semester started, and it still fell apart. It just takes time. And then from that, I pulled out some conclusions for myself about this whole exercise. I think that thinking about student engagement as a way to usefully get students more interested in the aging thing did work. The tallies of how that worked might be a little fuzzy, but I think it worked. And I think that the next time I did this course through, I would do even more of a focus on that because I think it was worth pursuing. I wanted to see whether they were changing their attitudes towards the process of aging in the elderly, and I didn't find as much of a change as I thought I would in that. And I'm not sure how to interpret that. One of it, I mean, I would love to just say, well, is it the halo effect when just testing gives you a better result? You know, maybe like in the family class, just because I was asking them the question, it improved from time 1 to time 2. So I don't know how to interpret that, but I definitely felt like the notion of getting them engaged with their feedback, with the learning results that I was getting was worth pursuing more. All right, so that is my experience with a course portfolio. And let's stop for a minute there before I get you to think about how you might use a course portfolio. And see if you have any. I don't pretend to have done a beautifully perfect one, but I'm going to show you some beautifully perfect ones on the internet now. Any questions on mine, first of all? All right, let me show you some top-notch stuff here. There are you have these references at the end of the page in between, right after my summary and the what's in a portfolio. You have these URLs. The first one that I like to refer to as Cadillac Portfolios are at the Carnegie Foundation website. And if you go to the Carnegie Foundation website, this URL is in your handout, but in case you forget it, it's under Resources and Gallery of Teaching. And then if you scroll down to the higher ed ones, Did you find that page with the URLs on it? Okay. If you hit on the higher ed link, you get this collection of what I refer to as the Cadillacs of course portfolios. And they're electronic, which mine was not electronic because it would take me way too long to learn how to do this. But there's some amazing stuff here. Where you enter this one, they all have these. Portfolio entrance. We've got to go 3 pages in before we actually get to the portfolio. The travelers is her students, the destinations is her goals, the maps and guidebooks are what she was trying to accomplish. The wrecks and roadkill, who knows what's in there? So anyway, these are the Cadillac ones. Play around with that sometime when you are interested in pursuing what people who have too much time on their hands can do. My much more favorite ones are, oh, did I lose that? I had up another one. Let's see if I just decrease this, maybe it's still there. Yep, here it is. This one is through Lincoln University. Oh, I guess I did lose it. All right, let me just bring this back up again. Because these are much more realistic ones. Did I misspell something? I must have, yes, here. No wonder I'm not getting anything. All right, this is the one from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. These are much more realistic ones, in my mind. This is something you could just do with your Word file. This is an avenue where you can get peer review of your portfolio if you choose. If you want to submit it here and they tell you how to submit it, and the last 2 or 3 pages of your handout are used with permission from this site about what they say goes into a portfolio. But here are some ones to look at, and you'll see that their format is just text-heavy, much more sensible stuff to me. And they're from all disciplines, all over the map. They give you a good idea about what, it's working, it's working, it's working. Deb did say the internet is sleepy today. There we go. Okay, so this is a much more, to me, this is a much more realistic. This, most anybody who's got a text file could do. It gives you the outline of what's in this portfolio. It's text-based. It'll have links to student work that's probably kept somewhere on another server if they have that kind of thing. But this is a much more, I think, a realistic idea of what you're aiming for course portfolio. But it is interesting to look at those other ones and how amazing they are. Okay, that concludes the section of thinking about my portfolio and what portfolios look like. Any questions on that before we move on? Yes?
Just curious, you mentioned you use another control group
Yes.
in your study. Just curious, what's the result? Did you compare it?
I did, and the result was that there was not a big difference in looking at the process of aging, but there was in attitudes towards elders, but it wasn't I only had a group of 10, so I couldn't do statistically significant stuff anyway. It was all just descriptive because I had too small of a group. And then I also looked at the scores at the beginning, and the scores of the aging people were slightly higher in the pre-survey than the family one anyway, so they started from a higher point. So basically that was an exercise to make me feel better, but statistically it doesn't prove anything because I had too small of a sample. I got lots of interesting narrative comments from students though that said how much they thought they got out of it. And the presentation of the student work at that conference happens after the semester's over, which I thought was really interesting that the students cared enough to come back and do that. And sometimes students would say, I want to use this project for a senior project or something else later. So there was a level of interest that I don't always get with student assignments. Yes.
I wonder which component contribute to the change of the attitude towards the aging process, because if students work with the elderly, I thought maybe they change their attitude toward the elderly people, not the process itself.
Yeah. Narrative-wise, they said that the getting out into the community was a big part of that. And more so than the group work. Like one of my goals was having them work together in groups and talk to each other about this rather than just working individually might be part of it. But they said it was more the getting out into the community rather than working. That might help, particularly with new faculty. I don't know how new faculty survive, honestly. You know, we give you a PhD with absolutely no idea about how to teach, throw you into a classroom, you're struggling with your own work, you're in a new setting, you don't have a clue what you're doing, and most of these people desperately want to be good teachers, but they have no preparation, they have very little time. Well, maybe if you could say to them, if you do this portfolio, you can count it in your faculty development part of your package when you come up for tenure, and it will also help you sort out some of what is required to plan a course a little bit better. It's kind of a twofer. You know, they get something towards promotion and tenure. It's not just throwing their time away, but at the same time, they're hopefully going to discover some things that will help them improve their teaching. So that might be one. Teaching awards. Often people are nominated for a teaching award, and we have the Chancellor's Awards and the President's Awards and all these kinds of things, and you put together this weird package of stuff that is, a lot of it is pretty contrived. Well, maybe a portfolio might be a piece of that that's not quite so contrived, that actually makes sense. Program reviews. Sometimes there's a particular course that if you had this kind of information on it, it could really facilitate in a program review. Maybe it's an intro course. Sometimes, particularly in the natural sciences, they have a huge failure rate in intro courses, and that kids can't go on in their major till they pass that course. And it's part of IF, so the person who's teaching it is sort of in the bind. You know, they want to, or sorry, IF, that's Buffalo Code. It's in Gen Ed. We call it intellectual foundations. So it's a Gen Ed thing, but it's also necessary for students in the major, and you're trying to serve two masters at the same time, and you're being tough because you don't want it to get a play kind of attitude from students. But in doing that, because they're such big classes, a lot of students get washed out who then can't go on to do what they want. And all that kind of stuff in a program, if you're facing that, maybe you need to look at that course. Figure out, what can we do with this course? Is there a way that we can have one course that meets the Gen Ed things and one for our majors? Or if we have to shove it all into one, what can we do to be fairer to the majors who do want to go on and yet not make it too rigorous? That kind of thing might be a program review. Merit evaluations, I don't know how you do those in CUNY, but at least at Buffalo State in SUNY, it's all over the map about how you get discretionary money. And sometimes it's about who can show what they've been doing lately. Course portfolio might help you get discretionary stuff. Job applications, if you're looking for work, if you're a part-timer, and you're trying to document what you do in the classroom to get a real job, not that you're not already really working, but one of those that pays money, let's say, that could be helpful. Program accreditation, we always have to document student learning in accreditation things, and we come up with some interestingly contrived ways to do that. Maybe a course portfolio that gives the accreditor the whole view. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we implemented. Here's the student outcomes. Here's how we assessed it. Here's how we're changing this course. That's what accreditation is for. Scholarly publications and presentations, not to be sneezed at. Course repository for future instructors. That's kind of what happened with my aging one. I'm not going to teach that course again, but somebody else is probably going to have to pick it up at some point, and at least they'll be able to see what I did. Investigations of a particular question, that's back to like the biology people who couldn't use the lab. So to answer your question, no specific, but it could be useful in any of these. Any other general questions? Okay, since we've got this slide up, take a minute now and think about, knowing what you know about course portfolios, do you see in your near future, within your department or within your personal professional life, one of these ways that you might use a course portfolio beneficially? So try to think about one. Is anybody here with someone from your same department? Like you work, a couple of you? It might be good if for this next section of the course you could kind of talk to each other. Not that you have to, but I think it's interesting to see how people from the same department would see some of this. All right, if you're here by yourself, you're not from a department, think about one way, and let's get some examples going. So take about 1 or 2 minutes just to think of what you would do, and then we'll have a discussion about, just to get some variety of ways that people are thinking about this. And maybe you could look at the second question while you're doing that. Who would the audience be for this kind of portfolio? Because that matters about how you shape it. All right, I don't want to curtail the discussion, and we will continue to work with the people that you're speaking with for the next 20 minutes or so. But I would like to get some feedback from ways that you thought this might work within individual departments, because it's always fun to see how different people see value in this. The two individuals at the back, what kind of ways did you see you might use this, and who would the audience be?
I was lucky to be in the summer to make one of our courses in medical technology online or hybrid.
Oh, yeah.
So see implementing this, because although we have course material and I have slide and I have lessons, I would have to restructure those to fit into the online format.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
almost like designing a new course.
Right. That's an intriguing idea. There's a lot of us being pushed to do online courses that are coming into it sort of kicking and screaming. And it'll be interesting to see, both to document all the extra work that you have to do, but also to document what you feel as a person who's taught this in a traditional setting. How does it alter what's going on? And to keep track of that in a systematic way could be interesting, you know, especially if you end up getting student results that are different from what you normally get when you teach this course. You may have nice documentation of what led up to those differing results. Interesting. Yes?
I understand very clearly about how the goal of this is to improve the teaching and learning. That part I get. But is the ancillary goal of this to then publish the findings, or there to catalog what's transpired with the hope of creating some sort of a feedback? Is there some other?
You can do both. You can do either one. I will warn you that getting it published in the traditional sense of published will require you to do more of that inquiry kind of portfolio. This benchmark sort of thing is not going to cut it with the reviewers of most of the peer-reviewed journals that I know, which is kind of unfortunate. But I think the kind of portfolio that's just a description of your course and student outcomes is most likely going to go onto one of these, like that Nebraska website, and you can get peer review through that website. I have trouble getting my brain around this, and I guess if you were going to do that, you might want to check with your personnel committee or your department head or somebody about how they feel about that before you went to all the work of getting it into that format. But what you can do when you submit it to Nebraska is you can request peer review, and they will submit the portfolio to a selected panel of people in that content area for peer review. And you get quite extensive feedbacks. It's more than you get from a journal article.
And then does it get posted on the website as a permanent thing, or what happens?
The portfolio does, not the peer. Well, I think you can say whether you want the reviews to be public or not. Normally they're not posted, they come to you personally.
So the portfolio is
The
then
portfolio
part of that
goes,
website's
yes.
resident information.
That's right, yeah.
Do you need to go through the IRB process?
That depends on, now in Bernstein's book, he recommends that everybody do it, just to be safe, because I'm not sure what your policies are, but in our place, if you think you're going to present or publish about it, you have to have IRB. So he says as a backup, you should tell IRB that you're doing this and get student approval from any student work that you might want to share. And of course you take names off from it, of course, but still to have their okay. In our place, it's a pretty expedited process. When you tell them what they're doing, they sort of look at you and shake their heads. It's like, we have real work to do. Just, yeah, okay, do it, you know. I don't know about most of the IRBs. If it's a class project, your students are supposed to apply, but they do the same thing. It's a very expedited process. So I don't know how your CUNY system works, but I would say maybe Deb could put you in touch with the right people or the right formats to do it in whatever way is appropriate in this system. And the real reason why you do it is in case you want to publish it. And you never know till you're done with this. You might find something really exciting that you do want to publish. And even though you might be doing it just as this snapshot portfolio, something might occur during the course that means that you've got some data there already that you could turn into a really interesting paper. And then you're going to be having to backtrack to get the right approvals. Did that answer your question? Okay, what other uses did we have for these that you think might be? This group there, what did you come up with as a possible use, and who would the audience be?
We were teaching, parents teaching a hybrid course, I'm teaching an online course, was e-portfolios. We have these new initiatives that kind of are crying out for some kind of assessment. And the audience I was thinking of was the administration, because these online courses and hybrid courses are new. Portfolio system would be a nice way to provide something to reflect on institutionally, to say what's working really well, what's not working well, and to foreground the amount of work that we are actually doing to implement this new thing. So it really was sort of within the institution to show what's happening in this new classroom format. That's what
Whenever administrators are your audience, I always say, get a really simple, distilled summary in the first 2 pages in the front of it, because most administrators don't have time to wade through. They like to know it's there, but they want to see the good stuff, So pull out and distill for them what's really important about what you found. And I think that's a good thing to do with these anyway, because they get very weighty and bulky, and it's no different from doing an abstract when you do an article. You want to let people to read that. If they're really interested, they'll wade into the heavier stuff. What about this group? Did you find any interesting uses that you might?
Well, we're in the midst of proposing a new general education group, and so there's a lot of new methodologies that are being proposed, as well as new courses and other things, and we're trying to figure out how it should be not even just assessed but monitored. while it's going, because we're moving from disciplinary to interdisciplinary. One of the overall concerns of the faculty at this point is how do we ensure that a competency that used to be the domain of a single course, it's very focused and concentrated, still comes across when it's part of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 interdisciplinary courses now. And this seems to me to be a really transparent and rigorous potential way to do it. And it'd be open, and it'd be a resource. We're also concerned with faculty development. And if you cycle in and if the faculty cycles in and out of these courses, they'll have a manual almost for these, which is great. So for me, I'm incredibly excited because a great weight has been lifted off. Me personally, this has been keeping me a little bit, keeping me awake. Maybe 5 extra minutes every day to keep me awake. But
for the hour, you're already awake, right?
But this sounds wonderful, and our audience is each other. I believe it'd be primarily the faculty, as well as a little bit for the administration in terms of giving faculty credit, appropriate credit, wherever that may lie, for the course development and for their own teaching development.
That's I think, a really positive use of this, because we did that sort of gen ed transformation about 3 years ago on our campus and did a big upheaval and introduced one of these interdisciplinary courses, and it's struggling. And I think one of the reasons it's struggling is that there is just everybody feels like they're reinventing the wheel every time they teach it. And we have a sort of a common book of readings that people share, but it's still hard when you're working outside of your traditional comfort zones to take somebody else's reading and create lessons around it. And I think it would be wonderful to be able to pick up a course portfolio and say, oh, that's how he or she did that, and that's the way they implemented that. And you don't have to follow it, but it can spin your own ideas.
Plus, the gen ed is a standard in middle states. And all the documentation and the analysis will be done as someone writes the report.
That's
it's going to be a lovely thing for me to just cut and paste into the document.
Right.
And I think middle states will fall over themselves because it'll be so transparent for them as well.
Right. And if you can, the people who are teaching it, who are going to do these, if you can sort of stress to them, try to create your portfolio around your existing student assessment tools or evaluation tools within the course, so that if people so often see this as a huge extra thing, and I really don't believe that it has to be. I think it's just, it requires the discipline of keeping track of stuff and pulling it together at the end. But it really, it doesn't have to be an onerous additional task. Yes?
I'm wondering how much transparency there is for students. How much access would they have to a document like this? If they wanted to see, is this the kind of class that I want to take?
That's a good question.
Would that be unfair that I offered the program this way this time and I don't offer it that way the next time? And the student sees it and says, well, I signed up for the class where we go and do the interviews, and instead this time we do something else.
Yeah.
But I'm curious.
That's an excellent question, because I had one of the courses that I taught where I had the most reluctant reaction from my students was an honors class. I've written the article From Disappointment to Ecstasy. It's about this thing. I was teaching an honors course, and I got these grandiose ideas. This is the cream of the crop, and they're our most wonderful students, so I can expect all this extra from them. Designed this really involved course where they were working in groups and they were interviewing students on campus, and it was a sort of a basic social science methodology class. I got so much pushback from these students, and it was a lot because I expected them to do group work outside of campus. And I couldn't understand their perspective, because in my mind I was not asking them to do any more work. And what they said to me is, when we just have to read and study, we can do that at 4 a.m. in our pajamas. When we have to be 3 of us scheduling a focus group on campus, it's our time doesn't let us do that kind of stuff. Now, whether that was an excuse or reality, but what they said to me is we needed to know this before we registered for this class. We needed to know we were expected to do this, and I thought that's a fair comment. Students should know before they register for a class you're going to be expected to spend outside time, so be prepared to do that and don't complain once you sign up. So I think that's an interesting point. What do the rest of you think about making students privy to some pieces of this in some way? This is a new topic for me, so it's group ideas here. Yes?
It seems to me the challenge would be that how much of it would have to be front-loaded. You know, a lot of this approach is kind of you're going along, you're keeping track of what you're doing, and you're analyzing it when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to make it useful to students, you'd have to already have thought through a lot of that before the class begins.
Right.
On that point, what I was thinking of really was I did it in the fall semester, and it was available, say, online. I don't know, for the spring semester, for the following fall
If you
semester.
intended to do it.
Yeah, or maybe not at all. Maybe it's not appropriate. Maybe that's one of those, sausage making things that we can do. I don't know.
But here's an
It might
idea.
not answer the student's interest, the way it's done. But it could certainly be rewritten in a way that it explains something that's not in the course description, that's not public.
Or maybe excerpts of it. The piece on the pedagogy part of like what do we do in class and out of class. Maybe just that piece without the assessment of how it plays out, so that students would know the thinking more than just what they see on a syllabus. I don't know. It's an interesting idea though.
Oh, public syllabus also. Usually that kind of, the class structure is often in a syllabus.
True.
And a lot of people put their syllabi in there. It's good. Put
Yes,
big,
Deborah.
bold letters. Group work outside of class.
That's right. Do not complain.
I do it in descriptions. There is at least one night left, and
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
so many calls,
Feel more refined.
Mhm.
I was going to say, I'm doing a course this semester that I'm turning it into a course portfolio. And part of it is sort of, I'm videotaping students as part of the class. I'm going to turn that into part of sort of what gets put out publicly. They're assessing also the process. I've been very upfront with them about sort of how the course is going and the design. And I'm getting constant feedback. And it's an interesting process, but it's really mushy. Because
very
it's all
mushy.
sort of, coming together in the process. And I'm not really clear, and they aren't really clear about sometimes what we're doing. But hopefully the end product will look a little different.
Yep.
But trying to fold in students' perspective on the process and the pedagogy as we go through.
Interestingly, when I was writing the From Disappointment to Ecstasy article, I got some of the students together that were in that class. And I said, I didn't give them the whole article, but I said, basically, here's my conclusions. What do you think? And they had all kinds of new ideas for me to think about. So students, it's surprising what feedback you can get from students that you might not have thought of yourself. Yes, did you have?
Just like, in an ongoing process, you find that you have to confront, examine the assumptions you have about students, about material, and about the way you do things.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you say, well, there's students who like to, they can't go out and do certain things. That changes the way you're going to have to teach the course. But I'm thinking about, if you teach Shakespeare, it hasn't been much said. So I remember once having a teacher. I believe his notes were whited one time. When I had him, he had been teaching the same course for 40 years. And nothing changed.
Right.
But student bodies had changed. The jokes he used to make in school, people didn't get.
Right.
Because you would have had to grow up in the 1940s. And I think this is a wonderful way to rethink what you're doing.
Well, I did not do a course portfolio on this honors class, but I did write a journal article about it. And as a sociologist, what I discovered in reflecting on what went wrong in this class was exactly what you said. I changed my role as a teacher because I had these new exciting ideas about what the learning was going to be in my classroom. And so I altered my role, expecting these students to alter their role with me and be overjoyed about that. Now, this is like Sociology 101. Anybody knows the roles work together, and if you alter one, the other partner is going to be disturbed by that, but I hadn't thought about that. I thought that they would just willingly follow me along. And then it occurred to me that it's a double whammy with honors students, because honors students are precisely the ones who've been rewarded for doing the traditional role well. And it's really disconcerting to them to have the roles disrupted, because they get all their rewards for knowing how to jump hoops well. So I changed the bars and they were distraught. So what you said is really important. It does shake up your assumptions you make about teaching drastically.
But perhaps if you had taught that at a small liberal arts college, where students are frequently rewarded for thinking outside of that box, maybe you wouldn't have been faced with that pushback.
Well, I don't mean to talk about myself too much, but this is kind of an important piece of this context. My daughter had just graduated from the Evergreen College in Olympia, and if you know anything about that college, it is just, their curriculum is unbelievable. They take one course at a time, and it's multiply taught by, it's like learning communities. For this kid, it was transformative. She was just so excited, and I went to visit this campus. Now, I've been on a lot of campuses in my lifetime, and maybe I just had an unusual day at the Evergreen, but students were talking about what they were reading everywhere. I mean, they were having intellectual discussions, and this is a public institution. These are working class kids paying their way through school. They were a lot like the Buffalo kids in some ways. And they were having intellectual discussions. They loved this style of learning. And I wanted some of that to happen to my students, which is part of what I was trying to do with this honors class, thinking they'd be the ones. And again, sociologists, duh, you can't change one piece of the context and expect everything else to stay the same and have it work. But I didn't get that until I met up with, you just can't change your classroom in total isolation and expect that to be transformative. Because students are geared up for what the general norms are in the rest of the context. So, okay, so we've got a number of different ways that you personally see this working. Could you identify courses? A number of you did, I think, specific courses that would lend themselves to this portfolio. If you look at the handout I gave you, the one that starts with my description, my portfolio on the front, you'll see that the last couple of pages are actually the guidelines from the Nebraska site, where I showed you the more realistic portfolios. It's the last page on 2 sides where it says what to include in a portfolio. This section I pulled just right off that Nebraska website, and there's more there on how you submit portfolios and everything, but I emailed those folks and said, you know, you've really got a great outline here, can I just reproduce it? And they said, yes, go ahead. And I think this is, again, it's one style of portfolio, but it's a great place to get started, I think, if you want to pursue this any further and you want to think about how would you do this and who would do it and what questions would you need to ask yourselves, this guideline. And then on the last page, they have their actual outline of sort of the way that they recommend people put them together and construct them.
It's quite a campus for teaching and learning. I've
Nebraska.
pulled a lot of resources off in Nebraska
Yeah.
for astronomy.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
It's really encouraging to see some Research One universities getting interested in this stuff, I think, because that's, you know, that's always what, when I go to these international meetings, it's always, well, that would work at your community college, but nobody in the Research One is going to pay any attention to this stuff. Well, there's a few gems that have made that obviously not the case. All right, well, if you want to pursue further or ask me more questions, I'd be happy to hang around for another 5 or 10 minutes and deal with you individually. But, or if you want to work in the groups with people you're talking about to just think of what you might do next, that would be fine. Or if you want to go grab some lunch before you teach your next class, that would be a good thing too.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
All right.